A couple of weeks ago, I got into a discussion with one of my conservative friends over gun control. While he's not a gun owner, he told me that he doesn't have any problem at all with those of us who are gun owners or concealed carriers. He even went as far as to thank those of us who do carry, since we would presumably try to protect anyone around us if necessary, including him. Now, I can't speak for all concealed carriers, but while I hope I'm never in a situation that requires me to shoot back, I will not hesitate to protect my family, myself, my friends, or even strangers, even if their misplaced politics have tried to disarm me for years. Now, if our gun control discussion had stopped there, I wouldn't have given it a second thought and wouldn't have made this video to explain a few things and to dispel a few myths. But, as I said, my friend is a conservative, and he claims to believe in our Second Amendment right to bear arms, but then he throws a huge caveat in there. He believes that in order for anyone to buy a gun or ammunition, that they should first have to pass a government-run or sanctioned safety course, and then should have to register the weapon and the ammunition with the government. He doesn't get it. As I explained to my friend, there are three functional reasons a private citizen would want to be armed. The first is hunting. Even most liberals believe this right should be protected. However, liberals believe the Second Amendment was put in place only to protect my right to go hunting.
This is crazy. You can't certainly use this for hunting.
So you don't shoot deer with a bullet that size. If you do, you could cook it at the same time.
Nice. It's usually these same imbeciles who claim the rights guaranteed by the Second Amendment should be frozen in time and should only apply to muskets. But the freedom of speech guaranteed in the First Amendment must include all art, television, radio, internet, and all other forms of self-expression. Unless, of course, you hurt someone's feelings, that's totally off limits. The fact is that if hunting were the only reason to own guns, I'd have to agree that some of today's weapons would be overkill. Unfortunately, hunting isn't the only reason. Which brings us to the reason number 2 for being armed: self-defense. Gun control advocates and anti-gunners claim that all armed defense should be left to the police. Now listen carefully. Unless you are a complete moron, you'll agree that this argument falls apart immediately when you realize that the average police response time is right around 10 minutes. And in a life and death situation, 10 minutes is literally a lifetime. The police know they can't be everywhere. They know it's going to take 10 minutes to get there. And more than any other group, the cops know how critical that 10 minutes actually is, which is exactly why so many law enforcement officers around the country recommend their citizens be armed. It's not that the police don't want to get there sooner. In fact, whenever the police arrive, regardless of the situation, they show amazing and selfless bravery. Despite the rhetoric of so many liberals and racists, we owe the police our thanks and our respect. Blue lives matter. And finally, we get to the third and most important reason for being armed. An armed citizenry is the single most effective deterrent from government tyranny, period. By owning weapons and ammunition, we the people keep our government in check. And no matter what anyone tells you, this is the real reason the founders of our nation included the Bill of Rights in the first place: to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers. Which is exactly why nobody should ever register their guns or their ammunition. I mean, seriously. Why would anyone tell their potential enemy how to beat them? Why should the government know what they're up against? Whenever I talk about keeping the government in check, I can always predict the two things liberals will say. First, I get a look of disbelief that I could even conceive of a world in which the government would need to be controlled. In fact, during this most recent conversation with my friend said, "Tom, don't you think we're well beyond the risk of government tyranny?" Are you kidding me? It was just 75 years ago that Hitler came to power and killed millions of innocent people. But do you know what he did first? He disarmed his people. He convinced them that he would protect them, so they had no need to protect themselves. And they believed him. And this wasn't some third world country during the Dark Ages. It happened in Germany, one of the most modern, progressive, and technologically advanced countries in the world. And it happened during my parents' lifetime. We've also seen the same type of power grab happen in Italy with Mussolini, in Russia with Stalin, and let's not forget Idi Amin, Pol Pot, and Kim Jong-il. The list goes on. And it always starts with gun control. So no, we are not beyond the risk of government tyranny, oppression, or cruelty. In fact, I would argue that the risk is as great today as it's ever been. The second all too predictable question I get when talking about keeping the government in check always sounds something like this. Tom, do you really think a few untrained rednecks with rifles would stand a chance against the US military? Well, that's actually a great question. And the answer is no. I don't think a few rednecks with rifles could fight off the US military. In fact, I don't believe a few rednecks with rifles could beat any standing army, and that includes the French. But let's play this out. Imagine our government tried to assume even more unconstitutional powers and ordered the military to confiscate all guns in the United States. We all know that would spark a civil war pitting the out-of-control US government against a few rednecks with rifles, or what I like to call patriots. But would it really be just a few rednecks against the US military? Let's do the numbers. At the end of 2013, the US military was comprised of about 2.25 million people, just over half of which are reservists, not active duty. And instead of highly trained combat troops, about 80% of the military hold positions like accountants, doctors, attorneys, truck drivers, cooks, and other critical but non-combat roles. Meaning that aside from basic training, most serving in our military have very little combat training and probably zero combat experience. So no matter how you slice it, the US military, including its reserve forces, has fewer than 500,000 combat-trained troops. And at any given time, about 200,000 of them are deployed overseas, leaving fewer than 300,000 combat-trained troops available for immediate domestic deployment. But for the sake of argument, let's just say 100% of the active military and reservists side with the government and are available for domestic deployment. That means just about 500,000 heavily armed US troops have all formed up to take down this insurrection. That's really pretty scary. But now let's look at the insurgents. According to most estimates, of the roughly 315 million people in the US, around 100 million own at least one gun. And now it's impossible to know just how many of those 100 million would just raise their hands and surrender versus how many would stand and fight against tyranny. But just for the sake of argument, let's say 10% would care enough about their country to defend it from domestic invasion. That means over 10 million armed patriots would rise up against fewer than 500,000. The next argument used by the gun-fearing, government-trusting left is that despite our strength in numbers, the government has better weapons. And they are 100% correct. Which is why taking away the rights to own what little we have is so incredibly stupid. Without weapons, our superior numbers are truly meaningless. Keeping our government in check was considered almost a sacred duty by the framers of the Constitution. So before you roll over and surrender your freedom, liberty, and rights, just remember, American patriots fought and prevailed over a much larger, more well-equipped army to grant you the freedoms you are so anxious to surrender. I hope we're never faced with the decision to fight, but if it comes to that, I'll stand with my 10 million. Oh, and you're welcome. I'm Tom Milligan, and this is A Sensible Citizen.